And welcome everyone, particularly those new to Achates and Achates Inspires, and welcome to today's session on the new facts of culture and heritage. So for those of you that may not know, Achates Inspires is part of our free offer for the sector, bringing together exciting and interesting voices and perspectives on key strategic topics that sector leaders are all dealing with. So for those of you new to our work at all, Achates is a strategy, income generation, organizational change and recruitment company, which has for over 10 years provided provocation and inspiration to organizations and senior individuals across the cultural sector. We're pleased to welcome you all here today. This session has been recorded and is first broadcast at 1 p.m. on the 16th of October 2025. If you are watching that broadcast live, please note there are Achates colleagues on hand to answer any questions, so just pop those in the comments section. If you're watching after that live broadcast and have anything you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to do so by dropping us an email. And so, on to today's topic. Here at Achates, we are privileged to work closely with an incredible cross-section of the culture and heritage sector. We work across art forms, across geographies, and with organisations of all scales. And whilst each art form, each country, and each organisation has its own unique challenges and opportunities, there are also some very real facts that we're all working with. We all need clarity of purpose. We are, in most cases, seeing a reduced approach to communicating our value and impact. We need coherence between staff and boards, and we need the tools and approaches that enable individual and organisational resilience with integrity. For your organisation, each of these facts will manifest in different ways. You'll have areas where things feel clear and others which feel like the real priority. But overall, we're all facing the same reality, and crucially, we're all facing it with, I hope, the same intention, which is to find a way through. It is our belief here at Achates that the best way to empower the sector to address these new facts is by understanding what they are, understanding the context they exist within, and the ramification of those facts. And doing this requires resilience for us personally and within our organisations. And for us, this is only possible if you have that clarity of purpose. Purpose helps you focus on what you are seeking to achieve with and for your audiences through the work you create or curate. It also inspires and lifts your organisation and your teams through the meaning it enables. We've developed a methodology which ensures that once you can articulate your purpose in a measurable way, it can then be placed in harmony with your operating model to enable resilience with integrity. Your operating model can then fall into line in a way which enables it to address the realities of these new facts. The Achates triple bottom line, as we call this methodology, offers each organisation the capacity to develop a total systems approach to your operating model, unifying your staff, your board, your audiences, and leveraging the power of your brand essence as a result. This is our response to the new facts that we're facing. I am delighted today to be joined by two incredible sector leaders to explore their perspectives and their responses to this topic, and how they, with their teams and their organisations, are tackling the current reality. So I'll just quickly start by introducing them, then we'll dive into the juicy questions. So first, we're joined by James Mackenzie Blackman. James is Chief Executive of Theatre Royal Plymouth, a position he has held since January 2022. James grew up in Plymouth and South Devon. After concluding his education, spent 2 years working overseas in Nepal, Europe, and North America. Following university in Liverpool, he spent 14 years working in London at Greenwich Theatre, Lyric Theatre Hammersmith, as Executive Director of the National Youth Theatre of Great Britain, and then Executive Director of Sir Matthew Bourne's award-winning company, New Adventures. James was then appointed Chief Executive of Eden Court, Scotland's largest single-site arts venue, in 2017, and during his tenure steered the company through a period of significant growth and change. If I could just ask James to unmute and say hello to everyone today. It's great to have you with us.
There was a box in the way. Morning, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, James. Thank you so much for being here. And we're also delighted to be joined by Duncan Grant. Duncan is currently fundraising and communications director for the National Youth Orchestra. He's enjoyed a varied career, including time spent working with different youth charities, mentoring young offenders, and writing music for television and many other things. He's also a professional bagpiper and music producer and spends time traveling the world for gigs. Hi, Duncan. Can you unmute and say hello?
Hi there.
Great to
Good to
see you.
be here.
So, thank you both for joining us today. And I wonder if I could just kick us off by asking each of you in turn what you see as the new facts of culture and heritage that we're working with today. And I wonder if I could start with Duncan.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, I think, well, a lot of what I think it's interesting for us at National Youth Orchestra because we're both a cultural organization, but a youth charity as well. And more of my experiences was from children's mental health and kind of young offenders type charities. But it was always working with young people. So I was quite used to forming case for support around youth opportunities. You see what I mean? But what's quite interesting is making the case, but from our perspective, about why culture and heritage is so important as a developmental tool in people's lives, not just something that, you can enjoy later in life when you're retired or something, if you see what I mean. It's that it's not just a kind of nice to have in a way. It's fundamentally important for bringing people together as a means of collaboration and creativity, um, all of these kind of areas. And then obviously, what we're facing is massive cuts to music provision um, in schools across the country. So then you're thinking, how do you respond to that? Because it's not like we're going to get more money soon from the government on that. And also, something that I personally think about a lot because I can be a bit of a finance nerd is just the realities of government debt. When you really look into it, it's quite scary, and you realize it just isn't much more money to be spent. It's just mounting up and up and up. So I think it's really about championing just the incredible power and inherent value that arts activities can have in people's lives, actually as a fundamental tool of development and well-being, as well as something joyous um, and wonderful to have in your life. And that's what we talk about a lot at the National Youth Orchestra, is the fact that, young people just do not have opportunities to do in-person activities together enough. We talk about synchronous activity a lot. There was, I'm just trying to remember the name of the book. It's a book written recently by psychologists. We took that from, I can't remember the name. It'll come back to me shortly. But yeah, we talk about the fact um, that whether it's, through sport or art or other activities, young people need the chance to be able to collaborate to on a shared task, a kind of greater goal, and in that collaboration be something that's actually really fun to do and to take part in. Um, and I think that's something which people are now starting to notice a bit more, the general public, in terms of the fact that I think there's a growing awareness of we talked about, I was working in children's mental health charity during the pandemic. So we talked a lot about loneliness and isolation, all of those kind of things. And I think you couldn't go more than 2 weeks without a headline about children's mental health. And we had a big campaign run for 6 months for the Evening Standard, with the charities at the time, all these kind of things. And I think people really understand that, but now they're looking beyond the idea of just mental health support for young people, and they're actually looking, well, what are the opportunities for young people to interact with each other and to do things together, and how do the arts fit into that? Because whilst there's such a focus on STEM at schools and driving, and obviously that's essential, English and maths and these areas, but um, there isn't much room for collaboration there. It's mainly around just, getting past the next hurdle in terms of the exams. Um, Whereas where the arts can fit in is such a powerful way of learning those skills of of collaboration, of leadership, of shared responsibility, all of those kind of things. And that's what we're talking about a lot as a youth charity. So I'm coming from the perspective of working with young people in the arts specifically. I don't know if that made sense where I was coming from.
Absolutely, Duncan, makes a lot of sense and really interesting to hear your perspectives on the sort of almost shifting responsibility of arts organisations when that provision maybe isn't elsewhere. Thank you so much for kicking us off with that. James, I wonder if I could come to your perspective on what these new facts that we're working within from your context. It'd be great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we think a lot at TRP about how we are competing for people's leisure time. As Duncan said, we're in the business of bringing joy, and creativity and culture is a really wonderful way of bringing people together. And the truth is that people can make more and more easier choices to stay at home. It's incredibly easy to stay at home, and it's not lost on me that cinema income and cinema attendance on a graph goes that way, and purchases of 46-inch TVs goes that way because you can have a really fantastic movie experience at home, and if you need to make a cup of tea, you can press pause, you can wear your most comfortable and most baggy clothes, you don't have to think about what you're wearing. And we're incredibly proud at Theatre Plymouth to be in the business of bringing people together, but I think it is at risk. Duncan makes the point about curriculum. We're incredibly aware at TRP that for over a decade, creativity and culture has been stripped away from the curriculum. We all know that entry for GCSE subjects in drama, dance, music, and visual art are down in the region of sort of 50%, and A levels is not much better. And what that means is that there is a generation of newly qualified teachers now entering the profession who were the young people who did not access creativity and culture when they were at school. That is an existential threat to the future of live performance in England and around the world. It is that simple. If children, young people, and teachers do not understand the value that creativity and culture can play in people's lives, that will mean that there will be no history or understanding of the benefit of participating in creativity and culture, playing an instrument, learning to dance, picking up a paintbrush, or going to the theatre. So, those absolutely are the realities. At TRP, we've got four foundation pillars that underpin our business plan, and we consider those four foundation pillars as we decide what we do. And they are audiences and participants, the climate emergency, social value, equality, and inclusion. And those are the things that we think are really critical to the future of the sector. We want to be really relevant. We want to program work on our stages that talks to our community. We want to produce work that has the potential to have a life beyond Plymouth. But the truth is, the reality is about fighting really hard for an audience in 20 or 30 years. I talk an awful lot in this job about being the current custodian of Theatre Plymouth. I take the responsibility very seriously. A lot of fantastic leaders went before me, and brilliant people will come after me. It's my job to be a fairly interesting chapter in a history book yet to be written, for it not to be too salacious, but not for it to be too boring. And I really am concerned that in order for us to sustain an annual audience of 350,000, that we have to work really, really hard to encourage 10, 15,000 people through our doors every single week. So I think the new facts are around ensuring that organisations in the creative and cultural sector are responsive to the world that we're living in, but are also really focused on thinking 10, 15, 20 years ahead of themselves to ensure that organisations like mine and like Duncan's survive into the future.
Absolutely. It's some really important and, interesting points raised there about the chapter that we're living in. I love that sort of analogy there, James. And I think what I really appreciate and really respect in both of your approaches there is that sort of centrality of the audience. And by that, I don't just mean bums on seats, if that's relevant for your venue, as James, it will be for yours, and Duncan in slightly different ways for the work that you guys do. But by audiences, we mean that stakeholder portfolio that you are engaging with and listening. And, you both centered that in the work that you are talking about and how you're sort of seeing this reality. I wonder if we could turn to then the kind of, if this is the context that we're in, this is what we're facing, what are we doing? What approaches are you using with your teams, with your colleagues, with your boards, your, stakeholders to get ready to face this reality? What are those approaches that are being tested, that are working, that you're planning to use? James, could I start with you on that one, please?
Yeah, sure. Um, I mean, so many things. We've been thinking a lot at the moment about the cost of coming to TRP and the price of our tickets. It can be really expensive to come to Theatre or Plymouth. If you want to come and see Hamilton, you could be paying 70, £80 for a ticket. That is, by its very nature, exclusionary to a lot of people. Plymouth is a low wage city. So at the moment we're really focused on ensuring that we've got really easy and accessible points of access. So if you live within the Plymouth City Council boundary and you're not in our database, you can come to TRP for the first time for £10. We're also planning to launch a ticketing scheme for under 30s so that we're selling and moving under 30 audiences into unsold inventory every day on the day of a particular performance and pricing that accessibly so that those under 30s can get a ticket at band D, which is our lowest band, and you might end up in a band A or B seat. You just it's about creating as many opportunities as we can from a ticketing perspective for people to get involved. I guess what we're also doing is we're trying really hard to communicate our civic value and to talk about the impact that we have on the city beyond our stages. We're working in schools and colleges, in community centres every day at TRP, and we're very, very proud to do that. And I think what we need to do is to demonstrate the wider impact that our organisation has across the city and across the region. And connected back to my earlier point, we're really committed to being in schools. We know that it's incredibly difficult for schools to get out of curriculum time and to get out of their school settings. And so we're looking more and more to get into schools so that we can be delivering a really broad access to creativity and culture in Plymouth. And then we're also looking to diversify our income model because the truth is that, as Duncan mentioned, the state of the public finances is not good. We have to make assumptions that our public investment will continue to diminish. I think there is no environment where it will increase. And we have to be ready for the Chancellor to say, I just can't afford theatre tax relief anymore. Let's hope that she never does. But there are really, really difficult decisions facing government in the budget, in the spending reviews that are ahead of us. We're really mindful of that, and we're realistic about what that could mean for us. We'll be trying really hard not for it to impact what we do, but we will no doubt be needing to make tough choices about the years ahead.
Absolutely. That's really great to hear. So that range of looking at it from a business model perspective, from a community perspective, from a, ticketing kind of angle. Duncan, what's your sort of take on what are the approaches that you guys are using to this reality?
Yeah. So it's actually James raised a really interesting point in the answer before about talking about teachers who haven't grown up with the kind of arts background or education and that to see the full value of that. And I reflect on that in terms of another group of our stakeholders, which is one of the core areas of our fundraising is actually individual giving. So we have about 13,000 people across the country who give in one-off donations or, by direct debit, regular donations across the country, music lovers, people who care about young people, but mainly classical music lovers, really a kind of combo of both. But we're always looking at, I mean, I'm fundraising director and communications director, so I'm really considering two main areas. From the fundraising side, it's obviously long-term financial stability. I mean, less than 7% of our income, or fundraised income, is from the government, and we're not expecting that to grow at all. And like James was saying, we can, we take a realist point of view. So we're fortunate that it's a small part of our income anyway. So, but at the same time, I'm thinking about, to James's point about these teachers that have grown up without um, that experience in the arts. I'm thinking about when our donor base of individual donors who tend to be very old, 70 is quite young for them, in on average, they grew up playing orchestral music in schools of some kind. That was the reality of their schools. They all had some ensemble or orchestra or something. Now it's only 15% of state schools have, 12% of state schools have orchestras and 15% have sustained music education in the more deprived areas only. So we're going to have a new group of donors, in a decade time. The reality of our individual giving database will have changed, and we'll start increasingly getting to donors who didn't have that experience at school and don't feel the unfairness, because every single day we get phone calls from people saying, can't believe there's so many lack of opportunities for young people. So whilst our individual giving program is doing really well at the moment, I'm always thinking, how long will that be the case, and how do I replace that income? And as you know, that in trusts and foundations, for example, during the pandemic, lots of bigger charities which relied more on events and other areas and didn't do so much in trust, they suddenly invested a lot more in trust fundraising teams. And now it's just so much competition for the same number of major trust fundraisers, and then, a lot of smaller ones around, but it's not like every week you get a new Garfield Weston or a new Esme Fairbairn or whatever. So can't take that for granted. I guess it's having to think really tactically about, where the bigger wins will come from in our fundraising if we were going to lose some of the individual giving. And I see that as more of an American style philanthropy and major donors. I think there will be more pressure on really big figures and philanthropy to sort of step in with it and replace some of the government funding. Um, but it's one of the hardest ways to fundraise because you can't just ring up a billionaire. It's like, and it's the connection mapping type way can feel incredibly frustrating because it's so opaque. But anyway, that's one area. So it's diversified fundraising, but not just, isn't that nice? We won this trust here and there. It's thinking about the major replacements of funding, the biggest wins, because you can you can do the best work ever to get 70 grand from lots of 5, 10 grand trusts, or you can win over a major philanthropist side and get, £5 million for spread over 3 years or whatever it is. And that can be a transformational change. But then it's how do you replace that afterwards? So that's what we're thinking a lot about in the fundraising side. On the communication side, a lot of what we're thinking about is how to communicate to our different audiences. One is what we call musically curious teens who might not have had the chance to play an instrument or in an orchestra or an ensemble, but enjoy music and might feel that orchestral music isn't for them because they've never had the opportunity, but to show that it can be. So, a lot of talking to them is through TikTok and Instagram shorts and all of those kind of things, but through the voice of young people. That's the whole idea. We use the young people as role models, don't tell them what to say. We let them do channel takeover, etc. And to make it orchestral music relatable and interesting, which doesn't just mean playing more relatable repertoire like computer game music and Star Wars and things, but it does mean that to some extent. I'm always pushing the programs team to make some of the repertoire slip in some computer game music or anime or these kind of areas. But it's also just, I always say, when things are looking bad in the sector and area, then that actually strengthens your case for support. So you've got to use that. It gives more urgency. So it's used the scary backdrop of decline as a rallying cry and try and create a bit more urgency in our communications to potential funders of any kind, trust, major donors, individuals giving £5, £10 a month. It's a universal kind of rallying cry. So I think it's one of the main things I'm always saying to the team is, does this application feel urgent enough? Or it's not like we have to pretend that things are scary or bad. In terms of what we're talking about, decline of musical opportunities for young people, that's reality. So you just say the reality and just be really straight and upfront with it. Um, so that's what we're trying to do in terms of the case for support, really sharpen it, create that urgency.
It's really, really interesting kind of hearing that perspective, Duncan. And I think, really hearing that kind of idea that both of you have made around that kind of idea of diversifying what those income sources are, really looking at how we tell our stories differently, whether that's with an urgency, whether that's how we're articulating our impact, which historically as a sector we've perhaps grappled with and sort of found more challenging or less challenging depending on the situation. But I think, it's very easy in this context to talk about the challenges that we're all facing, and they're very real. But obviously, as we're hearing from what you're both saying, there are opportunities that are there that we are sort of exploring. And if you have a challenge, you tend to have an opportunity lurking somewhere that you can find. So I wonder what do you see as being those opportunities for a sector that to ensure that we can really make the most of this situation. James, do you want to start us off with some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm glad to come to opportunities because it's very easy to exist in everything that doesn't work, and all the challenges. But there are of course amazing opportunities. Um, there is so much more to do to diversify the sector and make sure that people who are disabled or from the global majority feel that the creative and cultural sector is for them. But it's better than it's ever been. There's still a long way to go. Um, the opportunities to ensure that our buildings are centered in our communities is critical. And the diversification of what our buildings are used for, I think, is really important, especially for buildings that exist in towns and cities. Um, we're about to start undertaking a piece of work at TRP to really ensure that both of our incredible buildings are busy all day, every day in our front of house spaces. It's a very, very simple sentence, but it requires a huge amount of strategic work to think about how we can ensure that should be the case. But I am not letting go of it. I care very passionately about it. If I walk through front of house and it's quiet, we have failed in some way to be at the heart of our city and our community. So we're really thinking about how we ensure that the building is open, and that people know that they're welcome inside of it. So that feels like a really big opportunity, I think, not just for TRP, but for creative and cultural organizations that have buildings around the country. And opportunities. I mean, I think everything that Duncan said about philanthropy and individual donation is absolutely right and critical. We're leaning into legacy giving at TRP because there is a generation of baby boomers who will be getting older. Yes, at those people who are younger and love TRP, it will be harder. It will be a longer journey to convince them about why they should support us philanthropically. But we do think that there is opportunity around legacy giving that we've not really explored much in the past. So we launched a legacy campaign a couple of months ago, and we will be absolutely leaning into that in the months and years ahead.
Brilliant. Great to hear about those sort of challenges that you're setting your team to make the most of that incredible space that you have. I can hear that challenge coming through in your voice, and I'm sure they're all rising to it. Duncan, what about you? What do you see as the opportunities in front of us, keeping us in this positive, forward-looking space?
Yeah, of course. Well, just as a quick point, just as James brought up, legacies actually for us as well have become really, really important. And they're always going to be a bit random, but we're trying to de-randomize it as much as we can by doing strategic work on that. So yeah, I definitely agree that I think there's a real feeling of a generational feeling of responsibility for when people had wealth from buying properties, comparatively on much but in a much easier way in previous decades, etc. So I think there is, I think legacy is extremely important. But I think mainly what I want to talk about was the fact that working for a creative organization, well, its artistic output means compared to some other charities like Children's Mental Health and Social Mobility that I've worked for, is we have so much amazing, exciting music and visuals, really, in terms of seeing the music being played on stages and the halls, and when we're working schools concerts to 3,000 pupils in Blackpool, the ballroom, and all these amazing venues. We have so much material to share, and actually, if you think about previous eras, you didn't have the internet and the social media channels and everything to just share and celebrate this, so as much as possible on my communications team, um, it's saying, let's capture as much content as we possibly can, but make it interesting as well. So don't just, film every concert in the same way, and get the young people involved as much as possible into creating the content. Just try and get people inside the experience, what it's like, we get grumpy conductors sometimes because we put a GoPro on their head and things like that, but I think it's one of the best things of working in this sector is the amount of amazing, inspiring material that you have to share. And I think that is a great opportunity. I really believe that. When I worked in Children's Mental Health Charity, you'd be using a video, your Case for Sport video, which kind of be used for ages and they get a bit old and a bit off the brand message. You go, right, we need to create a new video. But it wasn't like when we're doing, the National Youth Orchestra itself, we're doing 3 concert tours a year in all these locations. But outside of that, we have our Inspire I won't go into all the programs, but we're doing all these other things as well. There is just so much content that we can share, so much great music, so many excited, happy teenagers working together, and just raw, sheer talent. So yeah, I think that is really great, and I think you can show the importance of these things just by without having to necessarily tell people. We have this kind of show not tell thing that we talk about at work sometimes. You just give people the experience of, a Star Wars at the proms or something like that, and they think, wow, that's amazing, that's so exciting, that's the kind of thing that makes life worth living. So you just need to make sure that people can engage with it. And then a big thing for us is thinking, how do we get that to the eyes of young people who aren't actively following, Royal Albert Hall or classical music accounts, etc. Or what are the means to do that? Because when it happens, they're really excited by it, and they want to get involved. And when potential donors see this, they know it's important. It's obvious because of just how inspiring it is.
I really love that idea, Duncan, of, we do have all of this incredible stuff that's going on, and perhaps sometimes when we get caught in the slog of the day to day and facing, the reality of the situation, we sometimes forget that, our impact is literally alive in these concert halls, on those stages, in these classrooms, when our community colleagues or learning colleagues are there, and actually just finding a way to unlock that is yeah, that's really, I've never thought of it in quite that way, but it feels so obvious now that you've said it. So thank you so much for sharing that. Just thinking now then about how we're talking here about approaches that we're taking, the challenges, the opportunities, and I wonder what your perspectives are on anything we need to be doing more of as a sector to tackle the future and to be ready for the future, and to kind of push our way into it. And I'd be interested in your perspectives on what we can be doing more of collectively. So together, organizations together, individuals together, but then also as individuals and in sort of our own settings. Duncan, can I start off with you on that one, please?
Sure. I mean, I think James will have a lot more experience generally in the sector in different areas. I come more from as a musician and as a fundraiser and communications as well. That's how I kind of came to this role. So I don't have much historical knowledge, to say, um, but I strongly believe in collaborations where you can take different art forms together in a way that doesn't just feel like a gimmick, but is something really powerful and exciting, and you can bring different kinds of audiences together through that, and it's I think there's a lot that we can do in that area. So to give you an example, we're working at the moment with on-site youth zones, and um, that's what they do is they set up these incredible youth centers on sites the charity sets them up, but then in areas of real deprivation, and then they become basically autonomous units. So on site sort of it doesn't manage them because it knows each area, people from the area know what young people want in the area, etc. But they are, I mean, if you ever go to one, they're incredible. They've got absolutely everything in them, from climbing walls to music studios to you know, dance classes and they're great. But what they need is they need more activities in them, and they need more young people coming in and bringing those activities. And what we need is to reach young people who otherwise, even with a free for teens offer, they're never going to make it down to a concert hall or, so it's a perfect partnership for us from both our sides because we turn up with young musicians, we'll go into their sports hall area and we won't just play to them. We'll stay all day and we'll let the young people interact and they'll do like ad hoc string quartets in the corridors. A lot of it they make up themselves. And then the ones who are most interested at the end of the day, we take on to a creative workshop. And there's like real depth of impact there. And for our young people, it's really powerful because they they feel like they've connected their love of music across to their peers in a way beyond the concert hall, etc. So that's just an example of the kind of partnership that really makes sense, and is and I believe as an organization we can do a lot more of. And I also think to capture the nation's attention, if you do the right kind of partnerships, it becomes really interesting because if I we work with a PR agency, but it's very difficult for us to ever we're not going to get a story in the Guardian or the Times or ever saying National Youth Orchestra is playing Wagner and Mahler Symphony 5 or, at the proms. That's not a story. That's like, yeah, you're doing your job sort of thing. Whereas if we're saying, we're collaborating with this dance group or we're doing something in an unusual place, a different setting. We're splitting the orchestra to make it smaller so we can fit in somewhere we wouldn't normally be able to play. Those kind of collaborations make interesting stories and you're reaching new audiences at the same time. So I think that's something that I'm thinking about more in the creative collaboration side as a sector. I think when it comes to kind of often people talk about unified messaging, but I haven't, in my experience, seen campaigns working that well when you try and bring lots of arts organizations together, unless basically I always think if you have a campaign, it's going to have a very simple rallying cry. If it's a bit vague, and it's sort of lots of organizations that say hashtag music for all, but you don't really know what it means, or there isn't really a direct action. Personally, I'm not sure what the point is in that much, and it can be quite a lot of work kind of joining for all the calls and things. So for me, I think it's from our side, it's more around those creative collaborations and those collaborations get into new spaces, basically.
Really interesting, and that youth centre partnership sounds incredibly dynamic and kind of really exciting example of that. James, what's your perspective on what do we need to be doing more of?
I mean, Duncan touched on it, but we definitely need to be much better at talking together. I've now consistently heard from ministers and government officials for probably the last 6 months that our sector's really bad at talking in a unified voice. That they can be in meetings and be told the most important thing for the creative and cultural sector is theatre tax relief, orchestra tax relief, and then an hour later they'll be told the most important thing for the creative and cultural sector is capital and redoing our buildings. And then an hour later they'll be told the most important thing for the sector is creative curriculum. And of course, all of those things are important, but I don't think we are very good at speaking in one shared voice across either the arm's length bodies like Arts Council England, the sector membership bodies like UK Theatre, Creative UK. Everyone's just got a little bit of a different message. And I think if you're on the receiving end of that message, it's incredibly hard to hold on to what is actually the most important issue. Um, I guess I'm increasingly curious about whether or not it really is worth investing any energy in asking for more public money. I think something that we're really good at in the creative and cultural sector is saying that that's what we need. And I think an awful lot of time is spent um, uh, trying to get it. And I just don't believe it's ever going to come. And there's something that's quite relieving about imagining a world where that's not just part of my job, telling MPs, local authority councillors, ministers, civil servants, local government officers that what we need at TRP is more of their money when we know that there just isn't much of it to go around. So I think it is more about the other levers that are available to government and public bodies. Um, and local authorities around the country have got these big asset rationalization programs going on where they want to get rid of some of their buildings because they can't afford to maintain them all. And maybe what is needed in towns and cities around the country is that buildings like Theatre or Plymouth or other creative or cultural organisations are taken off the asset book of local authorities and gifted to TRP. It would cost nothing for Plymouth City Council to to gift us the building, and then we would have that asset on our balance sheet. That there are various mechanisms that I think we need to start to think about really seriously, because I don't believe that that a good use of our time as we move forward is to be asking for more, but I do think we have to get much more united in what the messages are.
Really important points there, and kind of that need to, there's always, it always strikes me as quite a deep irony sometimes as a sector that is so creative at its core, where sometimes when we come to thinking about our models of operation, actually we can get a bit stuck in being not that creative. And I think more and more leaders like yourselves are very much alive to that fact and are pushing and thinking in that way and encouraging our teams to go with us. But it's sort of an irony we battle with, I think, a little bit, and I totally agree can be doing better at. Now, obviously, none of us are doing this on our own. You are holding your organisations and your teams, but there's many people that are working with you both within your organization and outside of it to face this future and to face these new facts. So I just wonder, who your key collaborators are within that space, both within your organization and out of it. James, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, sure. Oh gosh, who are my collaborators? My board, my immediate colleagues, my strategic leadership team, my junior colleagues, my ushers, my bar staff, the performers on our stages. They all absolutely feel like collaborators every day. Externally, the local authority, the Destination Plymouth, which is the organisation that promotes the city, the bid, the Bivent Improvement District, the city centre bid, the waterfront bid, Plymouth Culture, the body that represents the creative and cultural organisations in the city, Devon County Council, Cornwall Council. The list goes on and on. And I also I spend some time reflecting that I could do the civic bits of my job 50 hours a week. I absolutely could. The running a theatre bit, I could just leave to my colleagues and just be lobbying, advocating, thinking in a soft power type way, for all of the week. And that really is a really big part of my job, and it's a part of my job that I absolutely love and thrive on. but it's hard. It's really hard striking a balance between around those civic and sector responsibilities, and our responsibility to our audiences and to artists. And I remember a few years ago, I was in a sort of workshop and coaching session, and someone said, think about your balance sheet, think about all your income at TRP, and think about what is the largest proportion of your income. And at TRP, it's box office, and that represents around 80 to 85% of our total income. And then the person leading the session said, do you spend 80 to 85% of your time thinking about how you grow, develop, and invest in that income? Of course I don't. Of course I don't. Our public subsidy represents 7, 8, 9% of our total income. I probably spend about, as I just said, 50% of my time feeling like that's where I need to be. And it's a really interesting provocation to think about the mix of your income and the mix of your time and putting the two side by side each other and considering, gosh, if I wanted to grow my development income, my fundraised income at TRP, what would it look like if I just invested more of my time thinking about that and doing that? And yeah, that was just a really useful lesson a few years ago.
A really useful one to share as well. I mean, I've always said, that those balance sheets, those management accounts are telling you a story, but how much do we actually transfer it to then the resources that we have as individuals and as leaders? So I'm sure there's many people who've gone, huh, when you made that point, and we'll be doing a quick back of an envelope check on how they're spending their time. So thanks for sharing that, James. Duncan, what about you? Who are those key collaborators that you're working with to face this reality? I imagine it's a similar length of list.
Yeah, I mean, I think what James said is absolutely, I feel exactly the same about I could spend, you know, I naturally spend most of my time, more time than anything else, worrying about where the money's coming from, because that keeps, that's feeding the coal and the locomotive sort of thing. But in the more the comm side of my role, I could spend a limitless amount of time on collaborations, and developing that further across all kinds of areas, um, other youth organizations, other creative youth organizations, uh, conductors, composers, musicians from different genres, all kinds of things, and this is actually endless. Luckily, we've got someone starting next month who's going to be devoted to partnerships purely because I think that's something we really needed the organization. So that's going to come in. In terms of, we tend to, I suppose you could kind of group the collaborators in different areas. There's the collaborators for our actual creative output, which is um, so conductors, composers, and we try to work with as many female composers and those in global majority as we can, as well. So we have some kind of ongoing relationships, and then we have ones who will sporadically work with us and etc. So we have the kind of creative output collaborators. Then we have was the parents or collaborators, and it's not just parents of the young people in the orchestra, it's parents of who bring young people to anything, to a concert, to creative workshop, to the youth centers, to any space where they can work with in an NYO project in some kind. Then we've got the music education sector, absolutely key. And I won't go into all the different organizations involved in that, but obviously we can't exist as an organization without the help of the music education sector. And we are just one small part. We know what part we play, um, in terms of which is, playing this music generally to a really high level and really enabling these young musicians to be role models to their peers and inspire generation, etc. But we're not doing day-to-day lessons. We're not, in the schools running ensembles. It's, most of it we're not doing in terms of music education, obviously, but we do play a crucial part in the whole, in the wholes. Um, but we can only operate with really good relationships in place and across the country as well. We're national. There's there's no point in us just having amazing relationships in place in the southeast or one area. It's got to be across the country. And then I would say finally is in terms of the stewardship side of fundraising, I'd say our funders are collaborators as well, because to keep them loyal and keep them involved, keep them believing in their cause and knowing the importance of their impact, it's an ongoing relationship that you have with them. And I try as much as possible to drive the team to move away from just, yes, we got the funding in, thank you letter, and then waiting till, oh my God, we got a report coming up, and then to think about what would that funder love to hear about? Or is there a short video of something that isn't a concert, but was an ad hoc thing that happened in one of the residencies that we've got permissions and young people to share? That this funder, we know they'd like that, that kind of thing to make them really feel part of the community and really valued. And I think that's really increasingly important in a very competitive fundraising landscape as well.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting, to hear from you both in terms of that huge list of collaborators that sit across the creative, the internal colleagues, the, external kind of partners, etc., and the need to kind of hold all of that. Now, I'm very conscious of how busy you both are, and I do need to release you back to your day jobs, as huge as they are. So if I could just close us on one question, which is just, your best sort of tip for our audience for maintaining sort of individual resilience. So how do you maintain your own resilience that sort of enables you to lead and to face the sector as it is at the moment? Just one tip. I'm sure you've got many you could share, but if you can try and put it to one. Duncan, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, I suppose it's probably been maybe a bit too personal to me, but I mean, I always grew up playing music, and it's interesting, James, that Eden Court, because that's where we had the Northern Meeting bagpipe competitions, and I won the junior competitions when I was 16, I think, and that was, one of the biggest achievements in my life, and it was always a huge part of my life. And to me, writing, producing music is by far my favorite thing existing in this world to do. And for me, I take the moments in my job in the performances, the moments where I get like a real shiver down my spine. In particular, like there was a part in Petrushka, by Stravinsky, which I actually find quite a boring piece, but there's one sort of literally 5 second motif that I love so much that I just, when they were playing that in the roundhouse and it came in, I just thought, this is what it's all about. This is the magic of what they've just created, these young people. It's just, it really makes life worth living. And it gives me so much energy for the difficult times. And I feel very lucky, yeah, to work in an area where I'm trying to advance something that in my own life, as I've known, has given me a real purpose, and so I just want other young people to experience that as well. So it's really, I guess the tip would be, despite all the, the rejected applications and difficult times and things, it's, if you are working for an arts cultural organization, is to just really enjoy that art, really enjoy it as much as you can, to remind yourself, you know, why it's different from being a lawyer or different from being something a bit more dry. It's to really, really, and take those moments to kind of fuel you up for the difficult time.
I love that. Remember why we're here. James.
Gosh, Duncan, that was so profound. When you asked the question, Vicky, I just thought, how do I maintain perspective? And I thought just watching really trashy TV to take my mind off it all, and making a roast dinner on a Sunday whilst watching Married at First Sight Australia. That is the truth. But that isn't really what you asked me. Um, gosh, I actually don't know. I actually find it really hard. You sort of cut me in half and outspills a theatre chief executive. I don't know how to do anything else. I know an awful lot about very little. I'm terrible at Trivial Pursuit, terrible at pub quizzes. I know absolutely nothing other than what I know. And uh, what if I'm thinking about the thing that you asked in your question, I'm just trying my best to be a big, good colleague, good husband, and a good dad, and then of course a good son and a good uncle and all the other things that go with just sort of living in this planet, in this body in 2025. So I just think it's really hard. It's really hard. We don't live in a world where we, leave work behind. We carry it around in our pockets, for God's sake. Yeah, I mean, we've got quite a big IT infrastructure at TRP, and I was told last year that I had to take all my work stuff off my personal device and get a work phone, and I moaned about needing to carry around two phones. The good thing about having two phones is that I can choose in the evenings and the weekends to turn my work phone off and leave it in the kitchen, and that is good. But I don't have any missives or big suggestions really because I find it really difficult.
Well, I think that in itself is an important point for people to know. And I think there is space for the roast dinners and the Married at First Sight Australias, and there is space to acknowledge that sometimes it's about deep inspiration, as Duncan mentioned, but also sometimes it's actually acknowledging that we're all human beings and we're figuring our way through. And some days we're better at leaving it behind than others, but ultimately we're here and we've made a choice, and we're pushing through, as we said at the beginning. That the goal is shared in that respect. Is we are getting through this, and we are looking ahead with joy, and with sustainability at its core. Thank you both so much for joining us today and for sharing your perspectives. It's been really hugely inspirational for me, and I know that it will be for those watching. If you are watching on the broadcast on the 16th of October, there will be a colleague online for the next 10 minutes or so. So please do ask any questions. You can also drop us an email if there's anything else you'd like us to share with our brilliant panel. And as always, please do remember that Achates is here to help, whether that's implementing new strategies, whether it's developing fundraising plans, income generation, recruitment, change management, or just having a chat about what's going on. We've also recently launched Achates Community, which is our new platform for cultural sector charity employees to develop your skills and experience across all aspects of running your cultural organisation. It includes over 60 masterclasses on topics ranging from setting your income generation strategy, identifying your purpose, working with your board, as well as a leadership training program and online spaces to engage with our brilliant peers in the sector. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can check out our website, or you can obviously get in touch. Achates Inspires will be back in the new year in January, and in the meantime, look out for our upcoming Achates live sessions, which will be continuing to tackle those key income generation topics. And fittingly, based on some of this conversation, our November session will actually be on legacies. And then there'll be another session about working with your board on fundraising. So do sign up to our mailing list and have a look out for those. And obviously let us know if there's any topics you'd like to see covered in the future. So just leaves me to say another huge thank you to Duncan and James for giving us their time today. Thank you to you guys for joining us, and we will be in touch again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.